time slot. I'll be more...
False history gets made all day, every day. The truth of the new is never on the news. But you can find it here with news on the flip side. Remember, don't be politically correct. Just be correct. Join us.
Do you love sports? Okay, maybe just at least pay attention to sports. Then check out the Big Shoulder Sports Show, Tuesday night, 7 to 9 Eastern on UPRNTalkRadio.com and 107.7 FM out of New Orleans. JT, Justin, and I spill our guts about all things Cubs, White Sox, Blackhawks, Bulls, and Bears with no filter, the way nature intended sports to be heard. We also cover the national news in the sports world, but really, that's just because we have to. The Big Shoulder Sports Show, live Tuesday, 7 to 9 p.m. Eastern, right here on UPRNTalkRadio.com and 107.7 FM out of New Orleans. Or check out the podcast on Podbean, iTunes, and SoundCloud. 3 guys saying words, making radio happen every week.
Hello, everyone. Come join the discussion Saturday nights at 11 p.m. Eastern on the new program Global Newsmaker Focus with co-hosts Vernell and Patrice. Our weekly interviews will feature newsmakers from a wide spectrum of fields of contemporary and global interest. Hope you'll be there.
Tune in to UFO Undercover, Wednesdays at 8 p.m. Eastern, with your host, Joe Montaldo, right here on the Paranormal Radio Network.
If you are listening to the show and wish to join us in the chat room, visit paltalk.com. Go to the social issues, select Other, and enter the UFO Paranormal Radio Network.
Tune in to UFO Undercover, Wednesdays at 8 p.m. Eastern, with your host, Joe Montaldo, right here on the Paranormal Radio Network.
Welcome, everyone, to the August 28th edition of Global Newsmaker Focus with co-hosts Vernell and Patrice. This is Patrice Sheridan speaking. This evening's one-hour program is broadcast on United Public Radio and UPRN 107.7 FM New Orleans, Louisiana, and 107.9 FM and 105.3 FM Henderson, Pass Christian, Mississippi. The program's website is globalnewsmakerfocus.com. Our guest tonight is author, retired Colonel Richard Hobbs, who will discuss his latest book, Islam versus Civilization, The Great War of the 21st Century. The book's details can be found at coldoc.com, coldoc.com, and also on Amazon.com. Islam versus Civilization contains fascinating and important details on Muslim history, status, and current developments, and how best to implement an effective defense against the formation of a global Islamic caliphate. The Colonel's extensive knowledge of Islam and insights on Muslim history and ideology, as well as global military history and current events, make him the perfect expert to discuss the most effective strategies for retaining our Western freedoms and civilization. And for a brief bio description, author, retired Colonel Richard Hobbs is a graduate of the United States Military Academy at West Point. Selected as an original Olmsted Scholar, Hobbs received the degree of Docteur de l'Université in International Law and International Relations from the University of Lyon in France. He spent 2 tours of duty in Vietnam, advising Vietnamese paratroopers and serving as executive to the deputy commander in Vietnam, managing a large fire base, commanding the 2nd Battalion, 28th Infantry, and advising a Vietnamese regiment. Hobbs was an Army Research Associate at the Center for Strategic and International Studies in Washington. He has served in the Pentagon and with the Department of State as political military advisor in the Bureau of Near Eastern and South Asian Affairs. After retiring from the Army as a colonel after 27 years, he joined Teledyne, where his positions included Vice President International. He established his own consultant firm, Service International Limited, for international business development. Colonel Hobbs has taught courses in international politics and international conflict at the University of Nevada at Reno. Colonel Hobbs also has served as Assistant Professor of International Relations on the faculty of the Department of Social Sciences at West Point. Some of Colonel Hobbs' books include Radical Islam at War with the World, Do We Want Dimitude, Third-Class Citizens, Slaves Under Islam, or Do We Want to Be Free? It is Our Choice, Death by 1,000 Cuts, Islam, Fiscal Irresponsibility, and Other Threats to Destroy America, World War IV and Beyond, Islamofascism, The Third Jihad, and Other Threats to the USA, You and the New World Order, The Myth of Victory, What is Victory in War. Colonel Richard Hobbs' website can be found at coldoc, coldoc.com. Colonel Hobbs, welcome, sir. At the end of your second interview on our program, you referenced your wish to discuss strategies on combating the Muslim threat to our civilization. This is a one-hour show. What an honor to speak with you. What an important topic. And Vernell, I know you'll want to say welcome as well.
Well, welcome back, Colonel Hobbs. It is indeed a pleasure and an honor to have you as our return guest. I am as anxious as I'm sure our listening audience is to hear about your new book and the different ideas that you have to share with us. I'm just wondering if there's anything you'd like to say prior to that, maybe regarding current events or politics or anything of that nature that you'd like to just kind of sound off on before we get started.
Well, I'm happy to be back with you, and thank you for inviting me.
And, you know, sir, your book is extremely impressive. There's so many great suggestions. But now first, just as a recap for listeners who didn't hear our first two interviews, Colonel, could you give a brief explanation of why Islam is not a religion of peace? In fact, you and other experts believe it's a totalitarian ideology and not a religion.
Well, that's correct, and that is really the key to the entire problem that we face in this century, and it started in the last century. But what it is it starts as a religion, and it carries the facade of religion, but it is a total way of life. When you read the Quran, it gets into every aspect of your life. And when you get into the Hadith, which is the sayings and followings of Muhammad, then you really see that what it deals with is every single aspect of life, from birth to death, from going to school, from how to go to the bathroom, from what you do with your wife, what you don't do with your wife, how to pray, how to put your feet down, how to eat, what not to eat. It is a total way of life. And it's very clear in the core texts of Mohammedism. And I like to follow the guidance I got from Frank Burley, who wrote a terrific book called It's All About Muhammad. It's a new book that's out, and it's really excellent. And he suggested that I quit using some of the old terminology and go back to the way we did it before. You might remember that people always called some of these people Muslims, Mahomet, Hagar, Mohammedans, the Quran spelled with K-O-R instead of Q-U-R, etc. And so I've gone to that, and what you have in the Quran, which is supposedly the very direct word of Allah. Now, they like to claim that Allah is God. He's not God as my conception of it, and that's why it's not a religion in the Western sense, because it's not a beneficent person or image. It's all based on fear and obey. And you obey the messenger, and that messenger is Muhammad. And everything ends up being about Muhammad. And I end up understanding that, to me, Allah is really Muhammad, and Muhammad is Allah. And so I use the term Mu'allah, M-U-H-A-L-L-A-H. I put it together because I get the feeling that Allah really is the alter ego of Muhammad. And that's if Muhammad ever really existed, because there's a certain amount of doubt, and as in everything else, there's an enormous amount of mythology and lack of information. We're talking about the 7th century, so it's very difficult to get accurate information. But this is the reason that I say, and many others would agree, that Mohammedism is not a religion. It's not a religion in the Western sense because of being so totalitarian, and it preaches that all religions are to be removed. Only Mohammedism is to reign in the world, and all people are to submit to this ideology. That is a very strong and tough situation.
Indeed it is. And, you know, referencing your comment about the fact that it is a religion of war that appears in your book with great supporting arguments, indeed, as you note, ISIS or Daesh leaders in the ISIS or Daesh magazine called the Beak, D-A-B-I-Q, describe Dabiq, D-A-B-I-Q, thank you, Colonel, describe Islam as a religion of war, and these people are mocking our top government officials, I believe in their magazine as well, for not realizing it is a war. Also, the horrific atrocities committed by ISIS or Daesh have their examples in the Islamic sources, the Quran, Hadith, and Sirah. And, you know, your book notes that in a video on May 15th, 2015, ISIS's leader, Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, stated, quoting, "O Muslims, Islam was never for a day the religion of peace. Islam is the religion of war," end quote.
Old Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi got a little bit frustrated and irritated with Barack Obama and David Cameron and John Kerry and all these people expounding that Islam was a religion of peace. And so it came out not only in Dabiq, and for your listeners, Dabiq is a magazine, an internet magazine, and very, very polished, very professional. They have a whole section that is their information outfit, and that it does things, and you've seen that with the beheadings, etc. Very professional. Anyway, Dabiq has already put out about 10 issues. I think the latest one is number 10. And they started out with a different title, and they changed it to Dabiq after the third issue. And Dabiq is a town northwest of Aleppo in Syria. And Abu Bakr considers that Dabiq will be Armageddon, the great battle. And he wants to draw the Europeans and the Americans into Syria to have this great battle at Dabiq. And this also, so he made that the name of the magazine. So he got irritated with the people saying everything was a religion of peace, and they wrote a very long article in Dabiq. They had a whole page of quotes from the Quran explaining that it was a religion of the sword and religion of not of peace, but the religion of war. And then he also made a radio broadcast, which you just referred to, and took the people to task. Interestingly, we don't believe him, but he's right.
You know, also you have very informative references to the constant complaints by Muslims, both in academia, in government, and elsewhere, that they are being beset by a tremendous discrimination, that there's rampant Islamophobia. And you were mentioning how Hillary Clinton's efforts to promote United Nations Human Rights Council Resolution 16/18 on combating intolerance, negative stereotyping, and stigmatization of, and discrimination, incitement to violence, and violence against persons based on religion or belief. Regarding any alleged Islam, and that's the end of that actual resolution title, are inappropriate regarding any discussion of Islamophobia, because of the fact that really it's not occurring here. And I'm hoping I'm remembering correctly that Hillary actually had a meeting in the State Department with some members of the Muslim groups to discuss this problem.
Exactly. Hillary Clinton has been a big supporter of this all along, and it's disgusting. It's total violation of the First Amendment, because its whole objective is there's only one religion they're talking about, and that's Mohammedanism. They're not talking about anybody else. They don't want any criticism of this ideology, and that is a total violation of freedom of speech, and we cannot tolerate that. But the U.S. government is working in that direction. Hopefully someone will have enough brains in Washington to stop it. But we cannot tolerate that, because that means you cannot say a single word. Now, Patrice, this is not new. This is going on in Europe. You've got places up in England right now with hate speech. You say Gert Wilders over in the Netherlands. They put him on trial. He was on trial for 7 years before they finally acquitted him and threw it all out. But for talking the truth, quoting the Quran. And now there is a law being proposed up in Canada. Try to do the same thing. Oh, we can't say anything against this great religion. Nonsense. You can say anything you want against Christians, and people do. You can say it against Jews and Mormons and Hindus and Buddhists and anyone else. But you cannot say anything against Mohammedanism. That's unacceptable, and we must not tolerate it.
Absolutely. And, sir, on this Dutch parliamentarian, I believe his name is Geert Wilders. Geert Wilders, thank you, leader of the Party for Freedom. He has noted strong disapproval of the Islamization of the Netherlands and elsewhere in Europe. And even, you noted that France's Prime Minister, Manuel Valls, has stated that France is at war with Islam.
Yes.
Very, very powerful.
The French got a bit of a taste of it. Well, they got another taste of it just last week. But they got it with the Charlie Hebdo attack. And that's when they finally woke up, or at least partially woke up. But then you've got this newest one on the train where our three young Americans showed themselves as how great they are, and they were so wonderful that they barehanded went in and took down this guy and put him away. So, yes, but Gert Wilders is a strong supporter of freedom of speech, and his party is growing in strength in the Netherlands, which is good. There are a few other parties like that in other parts of the European Union that are getting stronger. The Europeans are slowly waking up. I'm not sure. I think that they're still snoozing. They're slowly waking up that they are in very deep trouble.
Well, you know, Colonel, in the very first interview here on Global Newsmaker Focus, you mentioned the extensive problems in France and these no-go zones. I believe in your book it mentions that France now has more than 751 zones urbaines sensibles, or sensitive urban zones, where police must have backup to enter, and fire departments and ambulances must be escorted by police for safety purposes. Also, there are now more than 8 million Muslims in France. That's quite a number.
Yes, the French have a big problem. Well, there are a couple of problems that we'll get to, Patrice. The first, of course, is you remember that the French mayor, right after the Charlie Hebdo attack, refused to recognize that there are any no-go zones. In fact, I think she sued American Network, and the American Network apologized or something.
Yes.
But as much as she doesn't like to admit it, there are no-go zones in France. If you go to France and you go to Charles de Gaulle Airport, which is on the north side of the périphérique around Paris, then the towns in the banlieue, the suburbs right on that north side before you go out to the airport, those areas are very heavily Muslim, and you wouldn't walk into one of those by yourself. And this is the problem. And it's not just in France. We have them in, they've just admitted, I just saw a big article about a lot of problems in Germany, but you have them, the problems in Denmark, Netherlands, Belgium, Norway, Sweden, all of these countries. And it's getting the same thing in London. You've got London Stand, and you've got the signs on there that you're entering Sharia-compliant areas, stay out. So this is a very sad situation. That is the result of the multiculturalism, the people who thought all cultures are equal and everybody is good and they should express themselves their own way and they do not need to assimilate. That is the mistake that Europe made. They're paying for it, and they're going to continue to pay for it, and the question is whether they're going to be able to survive it. The difference here, we call our country a melting pot. We have people from everywhere. The point is that if you're really going to be in this country, you're supposed to be an American. Even Vladimir Putin, a good Russian, gave a speech in the Duma, their Congress, and he said, if you are in this country, you speak Russian, and you learn Russian, you say you are Russian, and if you don't like it, get out.
Powerful point. And, you know, I will say this, your book does mention one positive development with Putin, and that was, didn't the Russian authorities try to warn us about the bombers who committed that horrific, horrible bombing attack in Boston? The Tsarnaev brothers warning our authorities, our American authorities, that these people were in the country and, to watch them carefully? That's
correct. Yes. We did. The Russians did tell us because they have a big problem in Chechnya and Dagestan, and that's where these people are from, the Zarnov family. And the Russians said, this joker's been over here. You might want to check him out. And we didn't pay much attention to it, unfortunately. We ought to go back to one thing, Patrice, just for your audience, and that is the term Islamophobia. It's been turned into a powerful word, and it's an absolute creation. It was created in the basement of a mosque or Muslim center in Fairfax, Virginia, where they were gathered and they were arguing about how do we stop people from picking on us. So they don't like to be picked on. They're very sensitive, poor babies. And one person said, well, you know, homophobia is a pretty good term. That's gotten quite useful in the United States for the homosexual crowd. And someone came over there, well, then why don't we say Islamophobia? And that's where it came from. It's a created term just to try to stop any criticism of Mohammedanism.
And there, almost an example of the Muslim concept that you've noted of taqiyya, lying, and deceit to promote Muslim goals. I'm trying to find my reference here. There was here it is. In your book, you mentioned an interesting find in 2004 by the FBI of the archives of the Muslim Brotherhood in North America. The documents indicate that a vast number of Muslim groups in the U.S. are actually controlled by the Muslim Brotherhood, with the goals of the Muslim Brotherhood to impose both the global Islamic Caliphate and Sharia law. You note the Muslim Brotherhood wants to conquer America from within in a civilization jihadist process.
Exactly, and that those words are their words, not mine or any of the U.S. government. This is a bunch of documents. What it was is they caught a guy checking out a bridge across the Potomac River on the south side of Washington, D.C., and he was doing all this stuff which looked suspicious. And when they went to his home, they found a false basement, a false floor under, I guess it was under his basement. And inside there, they found the archives of the Muslim Brotherhood. And these are the basic documents of what their strategy was and how they were to operate. So these were critical documents that the FBI found. They were the basis of the Holy Land Foundation trial in Texas, which sent about a half a dozen of them away to prison for 10 to 20 years. And there should have been a second trial. The first trial ended with the CARE and some of these other organizations being called unindicted co-conspirators, but they're still getting into the White House. The second trial should have been held, but the election brought in a new Attorney General, Eric Holder, and along with pressure evidently from the White House, the second trial never took place. So very difficult, enormous number of chapters, and it all goes back to the Muslim Students Association, which was formed in 1963 at the University of Illinois at Urbana, and almost every Muslim Brotherhood organization in the United States stems from that one, and now there are thousands of these organizations.
It sounds very insidious. And, you know, before I forget, because this is, and I hope I'm not, mentioning this at a helpful time, but you've done some great legal work here as well, not only with the lawsuit material, but also how some of these individuals can very much offend our laws against treason and sedition. You make excellent points on the need, Colonel, to deport citizens, mentioning the U.S. codes wherein these individuals would be guilty under sedition or treason counts. You also mentioned Senator Ted Cruz's bill, the Ex-Patriot Terrorist Act. The Ex-Patriot Terrorist Act. Do I remember correctly, sir? And then we'll mention the 18 U.S.C. Code, but on this Ex-Patriot Terrorist Act proposed by Senator Ted Cruz, that relates to individuals who have gone to enlist in ISIS and then want to return?
Right. I think if one of these folks wants to go off to Syria and play in the sand pile with Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi and his crew, I think, okay, goodbye, and you're not coming back. You're not, when you try to come back into the airport, nope, you're not allowed back in this country. You have made your choice, and that choice is an implicit renunciation of citizenship. And I think that should be held up in court, and they should be disbarred from being permitted back into the country. And some other people should be sent out earlier, but that's another subject.
Thanks, Colonel. Indeed, you do wish the sedition and treason laws enforced in both the EU and the United States, and you had a great reference for the United States. You mentioned such laws as 18, Section USC, Code Chapter 115, treason, sedition, and subversive activities, Section 2385, advocating overthrow of government, and also you mentioned the Communist Control Act of 1954, particularly with reference to its Section 2, conspiracy to overthrow the government, and related, possibly very useful terminology and concepts.
Well, we have the laws on the books. I mean, subversion, sedition, treason, those laws are all on the books. And when you say, oh, we ought to take over this country, or we ought to do away with the Constitution, or we ought to impose Sharia, that's conspiracy. You are recommending changing the government of this country, and that they ought to be in court because they are breaking the law. And these are people we do not need. Now, we've got a lot of them. We've got a number of them who have been in various positions in the United States government, unfortunately, who have said some of these same things. If one of us said it, boy, we'd be in deep trouble. But these people get a free ride, and I don't think that is appropriate that they should get this free ride.
Excellent point. And, you also referenced the fact that the Muslims refuse to acclimate. I'm not saying all of them, but many of them. And you mentioned particularly the imams in the mosques in Europe and America advising the Muslims to set themselves apart by dress. And regarding the United States, you gave the figure at 81% of mosques in America where either the concept of Muslim superiority or Muslim jihad is promoted or discussed.
Yes, and that has been substantiated by several different very professional studies. And the one that came out with 81% was done by a couple of very outstanding lawyers, and they wrote this long thing in the Utah Law Review, I believe it was. And they came out at 81%. This is where one of the key things that you get into this is that you've got to stop this nonsense with the mosque. Now, our good friends, the Saudis, who we've protected for all these years just so that we could have oil, but they have spent billions, that's about 80 to 100, maybe more, $billion financing mosques in this country, and then likewise in other countries, in the madrasas in Pakistan, which are these religious schools for the poor children, and then teach them to be Taliban warriors. But they spend all this money. Now, these are the biggest hypocrites in the world because there are no churches allowed in Saudi Arabia, but we are played for suckers because we permit these mosques. Every single mosque in the United States should be investigated, and if it has any violations, it should be closed, and all of its assets should be confiscated. I'm serious. This is the most dangerous thing in this country, these mosques. And most of these mosques are teaching the Wahhabi type of Islam, which is the religion that's coming out of Saudi Arabia. It's a Salafist religion. It's extremely orthodox, going back to the days of the companions of Muhammad, and that's the whole idea, is to return to the path of Muhammad. And this is another one of those things that's unacceptable, and we are endangering our future and our grandchildren.
Well, Colonel, thank you for this very important information. Now, you discuss at length in your book the development, it's called Sharia-compliant financing, and you note that Yusuf al-Qaradawi, the Muslim Brotherhood's spiritual leader believes that Sharia-compliant financing can be used as a vehicle to implement the global caliphate.
Exactly. It's one of the dangerous things, and this is where greed comes in. You know, bankers will sell their mother sometimes for more money, and they got so carried away with that oil money that was flowing into Saudi Arabia in the days when they had billions and almost trillions of dollars, and they were looking for how to get some of that, get their hands on some of that money. And the Mohammedans use Sharia-compliant finance. One of the things in the Quran that is banned is usury. They cannot charge interest. Well, that doesn't work very well in our financial system. They have ways of getting around it. And they have, with the SCF, the Sharia-compliant finance, they have committees at any bank or any major financial institution which passes on all of the projects that the bank approves. And so these people, all of whom, of course, are going to be Mohammedans, they have to say no to anything that involves pork, nothing that involves music, nothing that involves pornography, nothing that involves women to much of an extent, and any of the other things that they, in their nonsense, prohibit. So it puts a very great strain on being honest in the banking world. And Yusuf al-Qaradawi is probably the most dangerous man in the world. He is on the wanted list of Interpol. He should be arrested and tried. He has been banned from the United States and the UK. He's been in this country many, many times and founded a number of the organizations in this country. So, but fortunately, he's very old. He was living in Qatar for a long time. He travels around the world. He was in Egypt at Tahrir Square at the time of the big riots and the overthrow of Hosni Mubarak, when he was giving he's a big man of social media. He has a TV program and an internet program with millions of followers. He's a very powerful individual and doesn't represent anything that we could support.
Well, thank you for that clarification. Very interesting development, very negative developments. Now, you know, you had mentioned as well regarding the reaction now that is occurring in Europe regarding the really disquiet over the developments with the violence occurring now regarding some of the zone events, some of the zones, and in France is the zone events, Cible. Throughout your book, you really promote the idea of a careful analysis of the situation and steps to take. You believe that the invitation of Federica Mogherini, the European Union High Representative for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy, to Muslims to immigrate to Europe was very ill-advised. And also, Europe does have that problem as well from the Schengen Agreement. For our listeners, SCHENGEN, the Schengen Agreement, where EU countries have open borders at EU members' common borders. I hope that makes sense.
Well, you've hit on two very important points, Patrice. The first, and poor old Frederica, who's dumb as a board, I'm afraid, but she is representative of a group of Europeans that over the past 40 years thought that it was a great idea to have enormous amounts of immigration. And they didn't care whether they assimilated or not. They just wanted to bring them in. This was their multicultural fanatics, and she's one of them. The other, and that's the whole immigration thing, and that's still going on. You've seen it. I think it was even in tonight's news. It's in the news every day of the people trying to get across the Mediterranean and get into Europe. One of the weak areas is Greece, which has been in financial difficulty, and there are lots of islands, as you know, between Turkey and Greece. And if you can get to some of those islands, then you can get across You're either in Greece or you can get to another island that is Greek. Or you get across from Libya, and Daesh is actually financing a lot of that and making money hauling people across the Mediterranean. The point of the Schengen Agreement, and the critical point of it, is that once they get into Greece, they are in. Now there are no more borders. They can get from there to France or Netherlands or Denmark because they don't have to cross another border. There are no border crossings, no visas, no passports, nothing. And this is beginning to scare the bejesus out of the poor old Europeans that maybe we weren't too bright in doing this, because these people are taking great advantage of it. And you got so many people right now who have so many problems. You got people in Syria and Iraq that are trying to escape. You got lots of them coming out of Africa and bad places down in Nigeria and Gambia and all these other countries down south in there that are really, Sudan, that are really a mess. So you've got all kinds of people trying to get across to get into Europe. And from there, if they can get enough money for an airplane ticket, they can get to the United States because they don't have to have a visa. So this agreement of open borders inside of Europe is critical, and it's critical to the security of the United States.
Excellent points there. And, Colonel, back to that reference on the Muslims refusing to acclimate in their new communities, you mentioned no, I've already mentioned that, but also the Turkish Prime Minister Recep Tayyip Erdogan has advised Turkish workers in Germany not to assimilate. That's true.
We have the recording of it. He was visiting Berlin and speaking to a Turkish group. You might remember that the Germans imported large numbers of Turks for labor after the war because they had lost so many men in World War II and they were very short of labor, and they brought in a lot of Turks, and they were all going to go home one day. Well, it's 60 years later and they haven't gone home yet. And when Erdogan visited Berlin at that particular time, he assured them that they were Turks, they were not Germans. So that is the definition of the problem. If you're in Germany, are you supposed to be a German or are you a Turk? If you're in France, are you supposed to be an Algerian, a Moroccan, or are you French? Well, a lot of them consider themselves Algerians and Moroccans and not French, and that is a problem. And the Europeans are going to spend a lot of time fighting with that problem. Erdogan is an interesting man. He's undoing everything that Ataturk did in Turkey. He's turning Turkey back into an Islamic country, whereas Ataturk said Islam was stupid, and he turned it into a secular country. But it's a different problem now, and he's part of the problem. And that is affecting us in current operations, because we just made that agreement for him so we could operate our airplanes out of Incirlik Air Base to attack Daesh in Iraq and Syria. So after the agreement, what was the first thing he did? He attacked the Kurds, and the Kurds are the only ones who are doing anything significant against Daesh. So Middle East has more history than it can handle.
That's for certain. Well, Colonel, too, your book has a fascinating reference to Iran. These points include your reporting Iran's cyber hacking of the Turkish power grid. That was March 13th, 2015, with Iran's motive of retaliatory reaction due to Prime Minister Erdogan's speaking out on behalf of Saudi's attempts, including bombings of the Houthi, H-O-U-T-H-I, Houthi forces fighting in Yemen.
Houthis, yes.
Wow.
The Houthis.
Thank you. Well, we're going to, in a moment, have my co-host, Vernell, ask one of our wonderful listeners, Glenn's question. One quick comment. Before we leave Iran, I just wanted to mention my really great annoyance with this Iran nuclear agreement. The Times of Israel had an interesting article this week. It's entitled, "We Reject the Existence of Any Israeli on This Earth. Israel Should Be Annihilated," senior Iran aide says. And just quoting directly, it's not that long here. Advisor to parliamentary speaker rejects British Foreign Secretary's suggestion that Rouhani indicated approach to Jewish state. And quoting further directly, it was posted August 25th. Sheikh Holeslam told a Hamas news outlet earlier this month that Iran has resisted pressure exerted by the P5+1 world powers during the nuclear negotiations to halt its political involvement in Gaza, Syria, and Yemen. And further quoting, these powers admitted that the reason for their pressure on us is our position on Israel, he said. We told them that we reject the existence of any Israeli on this earth, end quote.
That sort of sums up the difficulty of negotiating with Iran, doesn't it? Yeah, it is a problem. Going back quickly, that cyber attack, the reason I wanted to mention that is that this is the modern world. That is just a case. We've had cyber attacks at various places in the Pentagon and even the White House. Everybody's State Department being attacked every day, thousands of attacks. But this is one where they actually did it and shut down about 40% of Turkey for about 12 hours or whatever it was. And that just shows that it can be done. And it can be done in this country if somebody wants to, because our power grid is extremely vulnerable. It's a very difficult situation. Now, Iran, of course, you have to go back. Iran, you got to remember that Iran, it was the Persian Empire. The Persian Empire reached all the way to the Atlantic and up to the Hindu Kush in Pakistan and Afghanistan. And as far as they're concerned, this area, all of that area should be Persian or Iranian. So when they attack into that area, they aren't attacking, they are just recouping some of their old areas. Well, Turkey has the same outlook because you have the Ottoman Empire. So you've got two empires that want to take control of everything. We have a real mess out there. I call it the Afro-Asian Civil War. Anyway, the Iranian business, the attacks on Israel are endless. Khomeini, the Ayatollah, who's the leader, the chief mullah, he constantly says something about Israel. Ahmadinejad always said it, all we got to destroy Israel. It's a standard line for them. It's gotten old. They've said it so many times. You don't know whether they believe it or don't believe it. Doesn't really make any difference. The nuclear agreement probably has little value. They're going to get a nuclear weapon. They may already have it. One general says they already have them. It's very dangerous to have one nuclear weapon. If you have one nuclear weapon, somebody might want to hit you, and if you fired it, now you don't have any. You got zero. So you're in a very dangerous situation, and you stay in a dangerous situation until you build up a significant arsenal. Now, the whole point of having nuclear weapons is psychological and power. You change from being just a country to being a nuclear power. And as a nuclear power, you have different respect. And so they want to be respected as a major power. And I think they're going to get the nuclear weapon one way or another. They get it in 10 years, if nothing else. But they most likely will have it much sooner than that.
Very disquieting information, but very, very informative response there. Now, my co-host for now has sent me our wonderful guest, Glenn. Glenn's a brilliant engineer from the Midwest, and I believe a chemist as well, a brilliant, brilliant guy. Anyway, his question is this. Do you believe that Obama is a Muslim?
Well, he sure does confuse me. One of the things in the book, and I think you noticed it, is the picture of him giving the one-finger salute, the Shahada. And that is the salute, meaning there is only one. There's only one God, and that is the Shahada. If you say the Shahada, then you become a Muslim. That is, there is no God but Allah, and Muhammad is his messenger. Bam, now you're a Muslim. And the symbol for that is to put your one finger up with a clenched fist, your index finger up. And that picture of Obama at the meeting with the African leaders shows him walking past them, giving that signal. And I don't know whether he did that out of accident or intention. I don't know. But he has done everything possible to keep us from facing the reality of the threat of Mohammedanism. And hopefully that will end in a year or two.
It is disquieting that we've had so many fine commanders who have been forced to resign at Obama's direction. I'm trying to think of the number, 250 or 260. It was a large number. And also, generals have been on Fox News, at least one, I think at least two at this point, mentioning that our military defense has diminished under these Obama terms.
Oh, yeah. We're hurting. We've cut the Army down. I mean, the Army's going down to 450,000. Good night. That's back to World War II. We have people, troops, soldiers, in about 170 countries. And we're not even fighting a major war at the minute like we were in Afghanistan and Iraq, though we're still there and adding more people every day practically. But we can't keep going on like this. And if we're going to have the capability to put people in all these different places for lots of different missions, then we must recoup. What it is, 10 years of war in Iraq, we burned up an awful lot of equipment, and we didn't buy new equipment. We spent money fighting over there, and we put off the procurement of new systems. And you've got to upgrade your systems, and you've got to repair what you've messed up, so you've got to spend some money on those things. So it's a very difficult time, and the Army is taking the brunt of trying to keep up the Navy and the Air Force. But the Army and the Marine Corps are taking the brunt because those are the people that are on the ground, and that's tough.
And their hearts are so strong and brave. There was an article early this week regarding a family, I believe it's New Jersey. The father and I believe the brother and two sons are going to be going over there to join the Peshmerga forces to fight against ISIS or Daesh. And you have to commend them. God keeps them safe as they fight against Daesh. And
now that's interesting. I haven't seen too much of it, but I did see a couple of headlines of people going over there.
Yes.
And that will be interesting. The Peshmerga is the Kurdish military. It's about the only fighting organization over there. The Shia militia that are being run by Qasem Soleimani, the general heads the Quds force out of Iran and is supporting these units in Iraq. They are the only other ones that are operating, and of course that puts us in the bad situation where we're working with the Iranians. So that's why I say this is the most complicated thing we have ever gotten ourselves involved in. And there is no simple approach for America in this fight. We are not a major element in it, and we need to back out of it because there is no one in this entire fight who really supports us. And any element that we support, we create enmity for another element. Now, what we have in this nice little war is we've got 5 states that have failed, that are gone. Iraq is gone as a country. Syria is gone. Lebanon is probably gone. Libya is gone. Yemen's gone. We have 5 centers of power. We have the Turks, and we got the Iranians, we got the Egyptians, we got the Pakistanis, and we got the Saudis. We got 2 empires who think that they ought to be empires again, and that's the Turks and the Persians. They should be back in their bigger empire. They should lead all the world. And we got the Sunnis and the Shia fighting each other. Good Muslims, but they're willing to kill each other. So, wonderful, wonderful folks. And then we've got an untold number of non-state elements in there, everything from Daesh, al-Nusra Front, Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, the Free Syrian Army, all these other organizations that are not states. So how are you Americans going to deal with this conglomeration of a mess?
Well, you mentioned positive developments. That would be the actions by Egyptian President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, and you also mentioned Tunisian President Beji Caid Essebsi. Now, President al-Sisi sent jet fighters against ISIS or Daesh after those Coptic Christians were beheaded by Daesh on a Libyan beach. If I remember correctly, he promotes that concept of first they are Egyptians, and he even spoke at after Christmas service. I believe it was the Copt Archbishop. I'm trying to think it was I think it was the Archbishop, welcoming people first as Egyptians. And you mentioned too that President Essebsi in Tunisia, similar to President al-Sisi in Egypt, has noted Islam's extreme aspect and the importance of the extremeness of Islam as the heart of this issue.
Well, I think these two presidents are the most important people in the area right now. And I have great hopes that General President al-Sisi can stand up for what he believes. Unfortunately, what he's saying is very dangerous for him, and same way with Essebsi. Essebsi made the strong statement that, we ought to separate church and state. Well, that's anathema to Mohammedism, because the two are all the same. But he's right, and the two of them, if they could get any kind of support, but it's very dangerous. They can be called apostates, and the penalty for apostasy is death. So somebody's going to be out trying to kill al-Sisi and Essebsi, and they've already been trying, and they'll continue. Fortunately, al-Sisi is a military guy, and he's got pretty good support, so he can hopefully hang on. I would like to see an international conference. I don't think it's possible, but I'd like to see them try. The point being that there is no center of Mohammedism. It's full of too many different yo-yo outfits. You got the Shia who think they are supporting. That's mainly in Iran, but they're over into the eastern part of Saudi Arabia in the oil fields, and of course the southeastern part of Iraq, which is the part now with the government. Since we threw out Saddam Hussein, we messed that up, so now we've got Shia running the country in Iraq. What's left of it? It's not about a third of a country. And then you've got Assad in Syria. He's an Alawite. That's a minority that others consider crazy. So, and then you got the Houthis. That's another group. So, and then you got Ismailis. You got Sufis. You've got all these different kinds of Muslims, if you want to call them whatever the heck they are. So they don't have a center. They don't have a headquarters. They don't have a Vatican. They don't have any place that can issue orders. So each one of them then can expound on his own ideas and call everybody else a criminal and try to kill him. And that's what they do. And so that is what we're in the midst of, this enormous civil war, and I think it's going to have to be worked out to where they establish a new order. We don't like the term the New World Order, but this is going to have to be worked out, and they have to work it out. We cannot impose anything, and democracy is the farthest thing from their minds. They can't even spell it. They don't even know what it means. You cannot impose anything. These people are going to work it out, and they're going to create a new Middle East. The old Sykes-Picot line, which created the boundary between Iraq and Syria in 1916, World War I, it's gone, and it will not come back. These sorts of things were done in the period of colonialism, and that has changed. It's gone. They will sort it out some way, brutally, but it's not going to be nice. But there's not much we can do about it because it's not our fight. We can argue about it. We can support some of them, but I don't see where it's intelligent to spend all our money over there or send any of our troops over there. We are not going to win this battle because we don't even know who the enemy is.
And, well, two additional strong points you've mentioned are, one, the necessity of either reforming or prohibiting Islam, that the violent
new trouble for Hillary Clinton this morning. Some new emails.
Texts, hadith, the Quran itself, the Sirah, have to have the violent verses removed from them, the violent material. Also, though, you mentioned the very key aspect of brainwashing in Islam. To me, a visual representation of such mental coercion was the photos of women in burqas. They're in a line there. They're walking in chains in some Muslim community with a female Muslim in a burqa beside them as though directing them. It doesn't look as though these gals are under any type of investigation. It's as though they're members of the community, but they're in chains. What is this, to preserve their virtue? I don't know. It's horrific to see.
Well, the treatment of women alone should discredit Mohammedism. I mean, the treatment of women is disgusting, particularly when you think back now to the attack on the Yazidi women, which was a deliberate attack to get these women and capture them and use them as sex slaves. That's disgusting. But again, our little, got to be careful, our leaders just don't want to face up to these things. This sort of thing, this is right out of the Quran. They don't understand that Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi is not a dummy. This is a man with a doctorate in Islamic studies from Saddam Hussein University in Baghdad. He knows more about Islam than poor little Barack Obama or David Cameron or John Kerry or all of them put together. He knows Islam very well. And what he's doing is pure Islam of the 7th century at the time of Muhammad. I mean, he's following exactly what is in the Quran and in the Hadith. Now, when we're too naive to understand that, then we have a problem. And, there is no hidden agenda here, Patrice. We always go back to Hitler and Mein Kampf. He told everybody what he was going to do, and nobody would read it except Winston Churchill. And so we had a great big war. Now, it's all spelled out in the Quran, the Hadith, and the Sirah, the trilogy, and it's very clear. They intend and they feel that they have divine authority that they should rule the world, and their ideology should be the only ideology. They like to call it religion, which I refuse to. But their ideology should be the ideology of every human being on earth. Now, you can't get much more explicit than that they intend to rule the world. Now, if we don't believe them, then that's our problem.
Indeed. Colonel, referencing back the offenses against women, of course, the Muslim offenses against women are such extreme human rights abuses. They include rape, torture, selling, and murder of Yazidi, Middle East Christian, and other women. I wanted to reference that on that Dabiq, D-A-B-I-Q magazine. I believe the organization called Human Rights Watch, I know I wanted to interview someone from that organization, have really analyzed some of the issues there of Dabiq. One of them was discussing acceptable sexual treatment of Yazidi, the girls and the women, And it actually included a segment where what they should do to Yazidi girls if they're too young to be so assaulted, what other sexual things they can do. This is so horrific, and I remember seeing a photo recently, about maybe 3 months, well, maybe about 8 weeks ago, or 7 or 6. It showed this group of Yazidi young girls. They were so young. They looked at anywhere from about between 7 and I guess many of the victims rise up to 30 and beyond. But the youngest girls looked 7. Their faces looked so haunted. You could tell they had undergone such trauma. They'll all have serious post-traumatic stress disorder. And some countries, such as Germany, are bringing them over to Germany to try to see what they can do to try to make these poor Yazidi girls' lives whole again.
Yeah, that's Sister Hogani, a wonderful lady that's doing that. It's disgusting. And again, people will not face up to it. This was done deliberately. And they have books, they have manuals on how it's to be handled, how the women are sold with a contract. They're sold over and over again. These people actually are writing contracts. It's beyond Western understanding. But it goes back to, again, to the Quran. The slaves are in the Quran, and sex slaves. It's what your right hand possesses. That's the term that's used in the Quran, and that means a female slave, normally who has been captured in battle or has been bought or sold. It's very discouraging, and the most discouraging, a discouraging thing to me is that American feminists, the women who have been screaming for the last 40 years or however many years it is, are extremely silent. Why aren't they up in arms over the treatment of these women? And why isn't the Christian church up in arms over the treatment of Christians? That's what bothers me. The American people are at the mall, they're sound asleep, and they don't care.
And, very powerfully said there. And, of course, regarding the men, of course, the Christian men, other, and even Muslim men who may consider not to belong to the correct Muslim group are beheaded. They are beheaded using different means, crucified, other horrible means of torture, including being burnt alive. It's horrific. And, I believe that there are groups of Syrian Christians, or there are at least a significant number. There is a significant number of Christian Syrians who'd like to immigrate here to the United States. To me, that would be really tremendously important for our nation. It would be, again, that beacon light, that beacon on the hill. Of course, you always have to be careful. We want to make sure that indeed they, have that they are indeed Christian. But and I'm just thinking, I wish I remember the attorney's name. He is from Chicago. I want to say his name is DeColaita, something like that. A brilliant attorney. I'd like to interview him on my show, on Vernell and my show, because he has helped so many Assyrian Christians and other Christians from that area to emigrate to the United States, where they've really have wonderful lives now. I believe now he might be under investigation, and I'll tell you why, or actually, I couldn't really understand why. Something about a report that he used, I believe it was from the EU, that they've done research. At first, a certain agency of the EU or a certain tribunal there was saying that the Syrian Christians had not suffered under the Arab encroachment. But now, I guess that has been reversed, or they have a new report. But anyway, I'm rambling. Colonel, before we probably will are about 10 more minutes, and that's it, on that concept of dhimmi or slaves, and that Arab idea as pictured in as described or modeled in the Quranic texts of Christians, Jews, and others acting as dhimmis or slaves and having to give a tax, I believe it's 25%. And do I have the name correct? Is it jizya? Jizya?
Jizya.
Thank you.
Yes, jizya.
And
that's the tax they have to pay. That's to stay alive.
That weird concept has been discussed even recently.
Well, it's appeared several times recently. It's appeared in Daesh. It's appeared in Pakistan. It's appeared a couple places recently. It was a critical part of the early days when the Bedouins first swept out of the desert and swept north into Syria and Mesopotamia. And what they had then was they had a whole lot of people. And they were trying to get all of them to convert. Basically, there are only two choices. You either convert or you were killed. That's what happened with the Hindus and the Buddhists, because they were not acceptable. There was one exception, which is people of the book, which the Christians, Jews, and some Zoroastrians. And they were given a third choice, which was to be submission and being humiliated and pay this tax called the jizya. And with that, they got a lot of money in the earlier years. In fact, it was Uthman, the third Caliph, who said, you've got to remember that this is what saved us. This is where we got our money in the early years. So it's a bad practice. It's brought up a little bit now. It eventually disappeared generally because it was very harsh. It was the Pact of Umar, the second Caliph, who made the agreement in Syria, basically, that established it, and it was extremely strict. It was worse than the Jews in Nazi Germany. You couldn't have your church. You couldn't do anything. You couldn't repair a church. You couldn't make any noise. You had to step aside for any Muslim that came along. And if anything was broken, the contract was broken and you could be killed. So, and the whole objective was to get them to convert to Mohammedanism.
Thank you very much for those very informative notes. Pardon me. Colonel, just two more comments. One was your book was mentioning the tremendous number, the many, many millions of Hindus and Buddhists killed in India. It was either the first or the second Great Jihad, but the numbers are astounding.
Yes, about 80 million Hindus, probably 10 million Buddhists. Well, about 270 million people were killed by the best estimates in terms of the expansion of Islam around across the Mediterranean and into South Asia. So it's a very, it is the ideology of the sword. I mean, it's always been the sword. Muhammad talked about the sword. Even Ayatollah Khomeini in Iran talked about the sword. We kid ourselves when we say that it is a religion of peace. It is, and we talk about moderate Muslims. Well, that's a bad joke. There are no moderate Muslims. There are practicing Muslims and non-practicing Muslims. A non-practicing Muslim is an apostate of Islam and is not a Muslim according to Sharia. And a Muslim adheres to Sharia. Well, they're a threat to the United States. So we have to make up our mind what we want to do. I mean, the problem, Patrice, is that you and I and most Americans, we were taught when we were young that all religions are good and you should never badmouth somebody else's religion. We should be tolerant. Well, we are extremely tolerant. The problem is that these people are totally intolerant. And it's time for us to quit being tolerant of their intolerance, because they have no intention whatsoever of being tolerant of us. They have told us right to our face and in all the writings that they want us dead. They don't want us around. Well, I don't intend to be that way.
Very powerful points. Colonel, I just had one final aspect that I thought was fascinating. That was, you believe that given the Muslim threat, both open carry and concealed carry of weapons, of guns, of course in legal, proper fashion, should be allowed for the American and European public.
Absolutely. I think the part of the solution to Europe and part of their problem is that they have had restriction on weapons for so many years, and that was the way they were subdued. The dictators of various times took away the weapons, and so now they can't. They don't have them. The people who have the weapons, of course, are the criminals. That's been traditional. In this country, we have a strong feeling of the Second Amendment, and the Second Amendment is not just against criminals, it's also against a tyrannical government. And so we've got to be careful of our own government. Thomas Jefferson taught us that very well, and I think that is the key point in the whole this thing. We've got a lot of weapons in this country, and, you know, we're having a political campaign right now which is showing the American people are very unhappy, basically, with what's going on in this country. And I think some of these politicians have to wake up that things aren't that good and some things have to change, and let's hope that they change peacefully. Otherwise, they may not. So it's very difficult. It's tough. We got to stop providing concessions to these clowns. They just look at that as weakness. We have to understand they have a totally different outlook on the world than we do. They don't see things the way we do. They are based on honor and shame. They're willing to kill their wives, mothers, sisters, daughters for honor. That's not our definition of honor. Shame bothers them. That bothers them too much. They cannot stand criticism. I mean, a little cartoon. We have cartoons of everybody. We make jokes about everybody. Big ears, big nose, little nose, whatever it is. We pick on everybody. Everybody. And we don't worry about it. They are willing to kill you for doing that. And that is something that is just not civilized. And that's why I say the barbarians are at the gates. And in fact, the barbarians are already in here.
Colonel, we have so appreciated having you as a guest this evening. Again, your latest book, Islam versus Civilization, The Great War of the 21st Century. It's been an honor speaking with you this evening. Do you have any final comments there, Colonel? And again, thank you so much to my great host as well. Renelle, right now, has been behind the scenes. Wonderful, wonderful co-host. Now, Colonel,
thank you again, Colonel Hall.
Well, thank you very much. And just two things. The book is available at either Amazon.com or it's on Kindle, and it's available at Kolbach.com, my website. And the one thing I think sums it up more than anything, I just love this quote. It's a guy by the name of Paris Dispersio, and I don't know what kind of name he is, but he's a Canadian. Wonderful name. And he says, Islam is a religion of peace, and Muslims will kill you to prove it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Colonel. Good night, sir. Good night for now, and good night to our listeners.
Good night.
Thank you. Good night.
evening, everybody, and welcome to this edition of After Hours AM. All hundreds of thousands of you out there, I know you're listening, and I know many, many more will download, so greetings to everybody. It is March 19th, 2015, and tonight I have a special guest again, Eric Olson. Tonight is our one and only special guest co-host tonight. Eric, how you doing, man?
I'm doing wondrously well. And you, Joel?
You know, I cannot complain whatsoever. I cannot complain. Well, you know what? I forgot to introduce myself. I'm Joel Sturgis, everybody, and I am your your host. And, of course, Eric Olson, kind of knock off the rust here for a second. It seems like forever since I've been on the air, and it's only been a week, man. It's only been a week. I don't know what the deal is. But,
well, you are a radio functionary, and when you don't have radio to function, it messes with your chi.
There it is, right there. It's got to be the chi thing, you know. But tonight, man, all of our stories are coming from AmericasMostHaunted.com.
I've heard of that.
Yeah, I have too. Eric, why don't you tell the fine people all about America's Most Haunted?
Well, America's Most Haunted is our relatively new website. It was kind of the final piece of the puzzle, until TV, of course. And we added that relatively recently. We had the social media going and the radio show going, and we had the book going. And we said, hey, we need a website. So we've been working on that, and we got some secret cool stuff going on, bubbling just beneath the surface, which Joel knows about, but we can't talk about yet, I don't think.
Well, I think we could talk about it a little bit. What do you think, Eric?
Absolutely.
You know,
I'd love to. What we've been doing on the site is we've been just kind of keeping up with the main cool things that are going on. But what we haven't been doing is kind of breaking it down and getting really granular with it like we do on the Twitter page, the @AMHaunted, or on the Facebook page. So we get into a lot more detail. We break the stories down. We're kind of lumping them together to a certain extent, and creating, master posts with various news stories and whatnot. Teresa's been doing a real good job of she'll pick a given topic and kind of pursue that individually, so she's been doing that. I've been more on the composite end. So what we're going to do is, we're going to start sharing content with Joel and his site. In fact, we're building a new site for Joel and After Hours AM.
That's right, man. And we also got one more big project in the hopper. I don't know, is it too soon? It might be too soon to talk about it.
Oh, man, we can talk about it because, we are doing it, and we are geared up, and we got a past and a future.
Well, one of the biggest shows on radio for a long time was Storytellers, and you were the host of that show, right? Weren't you?
I was the host.
You were.
It was